So while they're bringing up the slides, I maybe will give a background, because as I talk to people, it struck me that there are many people here that this is their first time in one of these 3 workshops. And so I just want to give you a heads up that this is my 3rd time, and it's also the 3rd time that we've gone through one or both of the Salford lung studies. And so since that's true, I'm just going to give you a heads up that I am not going to go deep into the Salford lung studies, the designs, significant decisions made, all those kind of pieces, but I'm going to talk just briefly, giving you a background of some of the decisions we made, and then about the blinding piece and why we made that decisions. And what I'd say is in Q&A, if you want more of that, then let's take it offline and not fill it up with a deep dive into it, because it is a complex set of studies. So again, I guess since the last time I was here and I didn't change my title, I've changed. So I have a role at GSK in which I have value, evidence, and outcomes, but I also have all of the customer-facing engagement across GSK, which is an interesting thing as I think about real-world evidence and how that impacts customers from our perspective, patients, providers, and payers, because now it's not only generating the evidence, but now I have the teams that actually go out there and have a discussion of the evidence with those customers. So this slide is controversial. It's controversial to me. I think it's controversial to people because of the really stark contrast between the efficacy studies that we typically do during registration that are under what we would call ideal conditions versus this almost effectiveness concept in which we're doing them under the usual healthcare practice. And that gist is what, when we put together an evidence generation plan around Breo-Relvar about the combination product, inhaled product, we put together an idea that we need to do some ideal condition studies, and we need to triangulate around the populations to bring together a book of work of evidence generation that gave us the composite information we needed to talk about the true effectiveness, the true safety, the true benefit of this medicine, and do that with the idea of standard of care. And so as I talk about the Salford lung study, I'll concentrate probably mostly on the COPD Salford lung study, but I just want you to understand that it isn't standalone. It has an impact because of its design and the first design like it, but it's part of a broader context going forward. Why did we decide to do the Salford lung study? There's a million reasons, but one of the keys is here on the right, in which when we looked at the randomized controlled trials in COPD or in asthma, you see that because of the 2 pages of exclusion criteria in the regulatory type controlled clinical trials, you were only going to get 3% of asthma patients or 7% of COPD patients. And so since we were doing those type of studies, the idea was then to do some interventional studies that went to a broader population. And then second of all, if we want to understand that, then let's look at factors that really are critical to differences in the real world. And so hence why we went forward with these 2 studies. I do want to set the stage, though, that these were designed as regulatory submission studies. They were designed to see if we can do them for regulatory submission. A topic for beers or something for a long time is the fact that they were so complex and so difficult to do that they no longer became regulatory studies, because we were able to file with our standard packages because these took so long to finish. So just real quick around the make. Again, this is the combination of beta agonist and an inhaled corticosteroid versus usual care, and it was the switch to the combination versus usual care. Now, some factors, again, I'm making comments so you understand the decision. So for all you FDA people, I'm not promoting something, but in this case, the belief is that there are differences in the delivery mechanisms of inhalers. And so that the delivery mechanism, in addition to then the contents of what is being inhaled, may have an impact on outcomes. And so by driving that, that's one of the decisions around blinding. And that is in our decision tree, which is there something inherent in that in which blinding may cause you not to then see the benefit? And so the complexity of blinding around that, that's one of those factors that came into it. The other factor of this study, which really probably differentiated as kind of the real world, is on the left, the exclusion criteria or the inclusion criteria. Very small. We tried to include everybody. So the difference between that small list and the 2 pages you see in COPD randomized controlled trials is significant. But the other piece around why we decided not to blind was usual care, was real care, and the fact that we used pharmacies to deliver the medicine. And we used the pharmacists to educate on the medicines. Therefore, it was the standard care in the UK for these people to go get their medicine, be educated on how to use the inhaler, the importance of adherence, and all those pieces. And if we would have blinded, we probably would have run into a lot of issues with that, and it would have been dealing with study medicine versus actually just dealing with open label medicine. So just circling back, because as I said, these are a set of studies that fit in a large book of work, but in themselves, we are still finding nuggets of information that give us insights. And I don't remember who said it earlier. One of the speakers earlier talked about the critical nature of insights into the future. They're still giving us these really powerful insights into COPD and into asthma that allow us in our further research to do it better or design differently. And you see it here in the fact, 2,800 COPD patients, over 4,200 asthma patients. We used over 130 pharmacies. Again, this is the UK, so this is not the United States. So 130 pharmacies in a territory in the UK is a fairly significant number. General practitioners, nurses, caregivers, with one electronic health record. That's something to highlight because that's why we went there and one of the only possibilities of places to go at the time we did this. The other thing, and one of the complexities though, is we had to train 3,000 people who were not usually study workers in study procedures. And how to try and not capture the data in the wrong way, do a lot of different things. So some of that extensiveness is what I meant by the fact that it took a long time to set up. It was much more expensive than we could ever imagine. In fact, it was not less expensive than a randomized controlled clinical trial. And it's one that we question every time we're looking at this again, whether we want to do it or not. And the fact, one of the questions we do a lot in some of the other disease states we're in, that a prospective observational study may get us 70% of the answers for a heck of a lot less money. So I think that's it for mine. So I'll leave it at that. I think we'll answer questions as a panel.
That's right.
So thank you.